This week's Thought Leader interview is with Tim Williams. Tim, thank you very much for giving us some of your time today.
My pleasure.
And for those of you that don't know Tim Williams, Tim heads up the Ignition Consulting Group, which is a leading knowledge hub for marketing communication professionals, devoted to helping marketing firms create and capture more value. Ignition exists to provide not just information, but insights designed to help make you and your firm more valuable and relevant to your clients. You can reach Tim and the Ignition Consulting Group team via his site, which is www.ignitiongroup.com. And once again, Tim, thanks so much for the time today. Why don't we go ahead and jump right into it, just kind of digging into some of the answers that were given by agencies. The survey was specifically targeted at agencies, and a lot of the agencies in our survey indicated that they believed their agency's positioning was spot on to attract clients that they want for what they do best. You do a lot of work with agencies to help them shore up their unique point of differences. Are the numbers that we saw in the survey consistent with what you typically see, when you're talking with agencies or visiting them or helping them out?
Yeah, I actually was a little surprised by that finding, Mark, when I saw it. I immediately thought of what the behavioral psychologists call the confirmation bias, which is a phenomenon that when you ask executives of a company, is your company highly differentiated? 80% of executives in any industry, not just our business, will say yes. But if you ask their customers, what degree do you think this company is differentiated? Then only 8% say that their company's differentiated. So I think it's human nature for us to feel like our firms are more differentiated than they really are. So I was surprised by the finding. I mean, in my practical experience, as you know, I spend most of my life inside agencies about every week, and I would say it's kind of the 80-20 rule. I think maybe 20% of the firms in America are what I would consider positioned with a differentiating strategy, and 80% kind of aren't. I think they feel like they are, mostly because they confuse a philosophy with a positioning.
Okay.
Right? They have a philosophy, and it might be a deeply ingrained, deeply held set of beliefs, which I know we're also going to talk about, or they may have a way that they approach their business, and it may turn into a tagline that's on their website, and it's a rallying cry, and you might see it in their office when you walk in. And I'm not denigrating that. I think that's important to have a rallying cry, but it's not a positioning. Right? A positioning strategy is essentially a business strategy. It's deciding what you do and who you do it for, and that's hard work. That's making decisions about more about what you're not than what you are. And of course, as you know, the big problem with agencies is we try to be everything, a little bit of everything to all people. So
yeah, it is. It's interesting. I'll never forget when I first started the business, I was presenting to a small agency network group of folks in Kansas City. I had about 20 people there, and I gave them, this was back in the day of the overhead transparency,
and sure.
I asked them to write down their agency's positioning or their elevator pitch, and I think 19 of the 20 were strategic and hardworking, and things that were very, I like to call it kind of fluffer nutter and very vanilla.
Yeah.
It is quite amazing. Agencies also said that they have a core set of values that drive all the things that they do. Now I know, as a small business owner, that I can have a core set of values and work like heck to instill those values, throughout the organization. But it's a tough thing to do, particularly as a growing organization. What do you find when you speak with and meet with agencies as it relates to kind of do a lot of them have established core sets of values, and how effective are they at kind of making that part of the organization, and any advice on how to help them along that path?
Sure. Well, first of all, I think it's very important for an organization to have a core set of principles and values. In the 2 books I've written, I have a chapter in each of the books that's just about the importance of principles or values. And I would say most agencies do have a set of values, and most of the time they're written down. The problem is I find that they're usually they're not terribly effective, mostly because they're not very differentiating. I used to do this little exercise in workshops with agency groups for the 4As and others, where I would take my flip chart and I would turn it around so the audience couldn't see it.
Okay.
And then I would take my marker and I would write down 3 words, and I would say, I just wrote down what I think your agency values are. I want you guys to I want you to take out a piece of paper, write down what your agency values, the top three things that come to mind if I asked you what are your agency values. And then I'd turn the flip chart around and I'd say, how many of you wrote down these 3 words? And honestly, almost every time, 80 or 90% of the hands would go up. And so the 3 words: honesty, integrity, respect.
And good values to have.
They're good values. They're good. Sure, they're good values, but I call them table stakes, right? There's a whole list of values like that are important, but would anyone ever work for an agency that's dishonest, doesn't have integrity, is disrespectful? Of course you wouldn't. So to me, for values to be effective within an organization, they have to be differentiating. In fact, this is a little unconventional, but you asked. I think that the most effective principles, actually, you can logically argue their opposite. You can't logically argue the opposite of honesty, right? No one would ever argue, well, you could be dishonest. No, you really can't be dishonest. You can't be in business and be dishonest. So if you have a principle that you can argue its opposite, it's kind of interesting. For example, an agency who says we will never present spec creative work as one of their principles. Could you argue that the opposite? Sure, and you'd say, well, that's dumb. Then that means you're going to give up a lot of new business opportunities, aren't you? Because you never spend. Yes, but it's a deeply held belief. So I have a collection of those kinds of principles that I think they're differentiating and therefore meaningful in the organization. They're not the kind of thing that people just say, yeah, of course, respect.
Right. How intertwined are core principles and an agency's positioning? Do they need to kind of perfectly fit together, or how would you?
That's a great question. I used to start consulting assignments by beginning with purpose and principles, so core values in effect, and then moving on to positioning. And this was back in the early days when I first started my consultancy, and I soon learned that was not the right approach. That was backwards, because it was too hard unless you have a really clearly stated purpose and you've given a lot of thought to it. It's a hard place to start. It's easier and probably more effective to start with a positioning question, because I found that ultimately, like you just asked, it's a great question, that the positioning ultimately does link back to your purpose very often. And I find that the agencies that have a hard time articulating their purpose really lack a positioning, and those two things do kind of go hand in hand.
Yeah.
I mean, have you found that as well?
Yeah, I mean, yes, I have, and I think about like our organization and kind of a principle that I've tried to instill among our employees, and that element of adding value on 3 different levels, as I articulated to our folks here, I think is integral to how we differentiate ourselves. It isn't part of our value prop necessarily, but it's part of a reason to believe why we deliver our value proposition.
Yeah.
So they do fit together pretty nicely, and yeah, I mean, is there a way, I had asked this as well up front, is there a way in which you would recommend an agency principal try and instill kind of the right set of core values throughout an agency organization? I mean, are there any, I don't know if it's tricks and tips or things that they need to be thinking about to help sort of manifest that value prop throughout the organization?
Yeah, I think it's an important question. We do surveys inside agencies a lot, where we will try and get a holistic view kind of from the inside out, and the survey is organized in a way that purpose and principles is actually one of the sections we ask about. And we'll ask, does this agency have a purpose that transcends making money? And so we ask for a agree, disagree, scale of 1 to 10. And then we ask, what do you believe the purpose of this organization is? And in an open-ended way, we let them play back the answer. We do the same thing with principles. We say, does this organization have a set of principles that guide its daily business decisions? And then we ask, what are those principles? And it's always interesting to me to see there are some agencies where the people in the firm can play back those principles very well, very well. They've been deeply instilled in the organization, and everybody knows it. And so I'm always impressed by organizations like that. Those that don't really have a well-established set of principles, the people play back what you'd expect: the generic honesty, integrity, respect, ethical behavior, good client service. I mean, all the things that, sure. But so the agencies that do manage to instill it, you know what I'm going to say here. The very most important part of that is having the principals and the executive leadership of the firm model the behavior that they expect of others, right? Because they can't preach one thing and behave the opposite way. And I love the quote by Bill Bernbach that I always just kind of carry around in the back of my head on this, where he said, a principle isn't a principle until it costs you money. Right? And that's when the rubber meets the road. So agency principals walk around talking about believing in the power of creativity and standing up for what we believe in and recommending what's right. And then as soon as the agency sees them start to pull back on that when money's at stake, when they see especially when they see their boss, which is really destructive, when they see their boss side with the client instead of siding with
the principals,
the people that work on the business, it just erodes so much trust.
So not quite as many agency principals agreed with the statement that the people who work for them are motivated by a sense of purpose that transcends money. Mm-hmm. Curious, you've been in the industry obviously a while. Are these findings consistent with what you've historically seen? Has there been a shift one way or another? What's your perspective on how these agency principals responded in their agreement that the people who work for them are motivated by a sense of purpose that transcends just making a buck?
Yeah. Well, I think, first of all, that the purpose is sometimes much more obvious to the owner than it is to the the people in the firm, unless they really do a good job of talking about it. I mean, we ask this question in an open-ended way in these surveys, and there's always a cynical group that says, well, come on, of course we're in the business of making money. I mean, why else are we? But once you set that aside, then there usually a group who understands that if they wanted, they could make more money doing something else, but they've chosen the advertising and marketing business because they're really motivated by it. And these are usually firms that have the BHAG, a big, hairy, audacious goal, where they're trying to accomplish something that is really extraordinary. I mean, if you look at I noticed just recently the guys at Droga 5 talking about their purpose, which is to become the most indispensable agency to the most influential brands of the 21st century. Wow.
Yeah.
That right? I mean, that's something to live up to. That's that is and I like the Jim Collins philosophy that really a purpose is like it's like a star on the horizon, a guiding star, like the evening star on the horizon, that you're always kind of moving toward it, but you never really get there.
Mm-hmm.
You never really. It is something that you may never really fully accomplish.
Sure.
Because it is so powerful and so motivating that it would take you a long time to achieve it.
Sure. Yeah. I think that's a great perspective, because it really, I'm again thinking about our business in this whole concept of constantly adding value to our clients' lives as part of the mantra by which we operate. Clients' lives and their prospects' lives and our own lives internally. That I always say that nothing that we do here is perfect, and that concept of added value has no end point.
Yeah.
And so I think the point that you're making is an excellent one, to set that principle so it isn't, you don't achieve it one day.
Yeah.
You're constantly striving to either work towards it or improve upon it or something along those lines. So I like that. I think that's great advice to kind of give to any agency owner, to think in those terms.
I'll give you one other really quick example that of a mid-sized independent agency. You might know them, Glen Evans in Kansas City. They are senior living specialists, so their positioning is around they're riding the age wave of the burgeoning developments in senior living, and so it's a great positioning strategy and a good business model, and their purpose is related to that and really meaningful, and everybody in the firm knows it, which is essentially that they exist. They get up in the morning to improve the lives of retired Americans, of people who've lived a good life and contributed to society, and now they're in the years where they deserve not to live in poverty, but to live a good, enriching life. And the purpose of Glen Evans is to help them enjoy that enriched life in their later years. It's very heartfelt too.
Yeah, definitely. That's cool. And it can, I would imagine, manifest itself in a lot of different ways within an organization like that.
Yeah, because they really care.
Yeah, philanthropically or however. Curious, just over the years, we started our business in '05, and I've seen a lot of change in the agency world just since '05. From a getting back to the whole agency positioning issue or topic, what kind of changes have you seen over the last 5-7 years in terms of maybe importance of agency positioning, how agencies are positioning themselves? Any perspective that you can give might help an agency kind of think about their world in a different way?
Sure. I think, for one thing, there has been a heightened realization that a positioning strategy is essential, because our world is being, the economists talk about, we're entering an era of hyper specialization in every realm, in every industry. Everything is hyper specialized, and we're past the era of the generalist, clearly into the era of the specialist. And you look at books like The Long Tail, are all about this, how we increasingly look to very specialized providers of services. And the other thing, so against that backdrop is what's happened just in the client community in the last 10 or 15 years, where the average Fortune 500 company has 17 agency relationships, right? So there's no full service AOR in that constellation of 17 agencies. There are 17 specialist agencies. One of them might be creative agency. But then there's all the other agency specializations. So I think agencies now realize, they look at that and they think, well, the kind of brand that I want to work for, the national brands that, the kind of work that I could do work that my parents would see, that high profile brands, to work on for that kind of a brand, our firm has to decide which of those 17 agencies we're going to be, because they're not out. Those kinds of companies are not out looking for a, quote, full service agency with a wide range of experience, which is how 80% of independent agencies market themselves. So I think they've realized, if we really do want to work for big national brands, we've got to stand for something.
How do you, if I'm a small to mid-size agency and I'm, the chances of my, getting a spot on that Coke roster is slim to none, and I realize that I've got, a set of mid-tier sort of prospects that I want to go after. Is that same sort of desire to specialize? Do you see that kind of happening in sort of that mid-tier marketer space as well? Or you mentioned the agency in, I think you said it was Kansas City,
Yeah.
Is that right? Yeah, where they have, focused on a specific industry sector. Is there a right way or a wrong way, or does it really kind of depend on what that mid to small size agency really wants to be when they grow up?
Well, it really is about what you want to be when you grow up. I have this chart that I use in my consulting work that shows the interrelationship between agency focus and client size. Meaning, the smaller the client and the less sophisticated the client, the more likely they want an agency generalist, somebody who kind of does everything. This client is not sophisticated enough and doesn't spend enough to have 17 agencies, right? They're looking for an agency. So there's a market for that, and you can choose to serve that market, and that's fine. It's just a strategic decision. The larger the client, the more sophisticated the client, the more they're looking for a specialist. So you just have to make, I tell agency principals and senior leadership teams, you can choose either strategy, you just can't choose both.
Right.
Right? You have to be on one side or the other, and if you try to play it in the middle, that's the worst approach of all, because then you really will stand for nothing. So I actually think it's not, for a small firm to work for Coke is not at all impossible. Coke employs a lot of small agencies. They tend to be agencies that are quite focused.
Yes, that's true. Fair comment.
Yeah.
And I guess lastly, any just general advice that you would give to the agencies listening today as they roll into the coming year?
Well, I guess
broad question.
No, it's a good question, because what kind of advice I guess I would give. I would say that agencies would do well to follow the advice they give to their clients. Okay. Which is, and we all, that's the irony of this, right? Is that agencies were so good. They're so good at walking in and taking an objective look at a client's business and saying, you need to focus, you need a positioning strategy, you need an identity, you need to stand for something. The client, when they ask their client, who's your target audience, and they say everybody, the agency pushes back and says, no, it can't be everybody, it's got to be more Well, just take that same philosophy, which we believe so strongly when working with clients, turn it around on ourselves, and do the same work for yourselves that you do for your clients in that area. Would be my best advice.
Yep, that's great advice. Cobbler's children have no shoes syndrome, and it's true for positioning work and the marketing of their own agency.
Yeah, for sure. That's
true in our world too, in terms of new business development. So
yeah.
Well, Tim, listen, I really appreciate the time here on this this Thursday before the Thursday of Thanksgiving, and I know you're a busy guy and travel quite a bit, so thank you very much for the questions that you provided and the time and the perspective that you've given us here today. And certainly wish you a great Thanksgiving and enjoy the time with your family.
You too, Mark. Thanks for asking. I appreciate it.